Is just the education that we are imparted in our architecture colleges enough? I'd say it is good, but it is not enough. With studying the course, one should try and have practical knowledge as far as possible, which means that even though it means you will have less hours of sleep, you should try and do internships all throughout college, because when you work with reality, that is totally different and your understanding is so much better of what you are being taught. So there are two things, the theoretical and the practical, and these need to come together all through. So if one is working together as an intern all throughout the 5 years of college, which is what I did, it makes a huge amount of difference in the way you start understanding what you're doing, understanding volumes and what difference does it make, what difference every single line that you draw on a paper actually makes when it translates into reality, because buildings are going to be here for 50 years or more and you cannot undo what has been done before. So you really have to think before you draw that line. And if you have to think before you draw that line, you can only do that if you actually have the practical knowledge. There are certain books that one must read even while in college and even post that, because when you're reading it while you're doing studies, it's a very different way you look at it, and when you have finished and you have some experience, there's the understanding of those books becomes that much more important. So one of these books is Form, Space and Order by Francis D.K. Ching. It's one of those must read books for architecture because it tells you what an L-shaped space does, what are different degrees of enclosures, how does a garden become a focal point. If you have a straight building and a garden in front, it may not be as focal as when you do an L shape, which makes it slightly more focal, as compared to a C shape, which makes it still more focal. So there are multiple of these factors explained very nicely through simple sketches all throughout this book, and this is one of those books that every architect and architecture student should read. So even while you're studying in college, it is really important to go out there, go to sites of construction, see how different kinds of foundations are done. Different soil conditions have different kinds of foundations that require to be done. In some cases where the soil is really soft, you need piling to be done. When piling is done, what are the different aspects? There are different kinds of piling. It is really important to understand how shuttering is done, because you design a complicated shape. Can that shape be actually constructed or not? Can the shuttering be removed when you do that shape? These are all aspects that you need to know when you're designing something, because it just keeps you more informed. Then you won't make something that is impossible to be constructed. Of course, today there are multiple technologies, from 3D printing to so many other things, which make a lot of complicated shapes possible to do. Yet it is really important to go and understand how things are being constructed, because at the end of the day, today in India, we are working with a large amount of unskilled labor who don't comprehend drawings the way they are supposed to be done. Internationally, in many other countries, the contracting teams are capable of reading drawings and translating them directly, and the architects don't need to go to those sites. But here, a lot of time there's unskilled labor, and to explain the aspects of your design, you need to go to site, and therefore you need to understand how work is done. These are some important factors that one needs to do. Along with the knowledge that you get from books, from videos, from talks, from images that you see and you read about, it is really important to physically go and experience those spaces on your own. Because only when you go to a building, when you sit in a volume, you understand what that volume does to you in terms of perception, in terms of how sunlight enters the space. When you walk into a building, what is the first thing that you see? Is there a focus point, or are there multiple focus points? Do you want the person to focus on one thing at a time, or do you want it to be open-ended? There are a lot of these factors that one cannot understand when you're only reading books and looking at images, because at the end of the day, you're looking at an image which is so small. The building in reality is not something that you can actually see unless you move your head from left to right, because some of those buildings are so large, or from bottom to top, as in the case of multiple skyscrapers. So one really needs to go and see these and experience them on your own. Whether it's in India or whether it's international, every typology of building and the different styles need to be understood And this understanding can only happen when you're actually physically there. You know, the way you perceive a building from the outside. What is it that you see when you first come in? How does the circulation move? The circulation spine, which part does it go to first, which part does it go to next? Does it connect in a nice way or does it not connect in a nice way? What does a large volume do? What does a small volume do? Each one of these has different perceptions, and these can only be understood in reality when one experiences them. A lot of people ask, how long should one work in an office before starting their own practice? You know, ideally, you should start doing internships, as I mentioned earlier, right from the first year onwards, so that you have 5 years of experience by the time you finish the 5 years of education in college. So you already have 5 years. Post that, a minimum of 5 to 10 years is what you should be working in, because let's face it, in architecture, today you get a design, the actual translation to work on site happening could be anything from 3 months to 2 years or 3 years in some cases, because projects take that long to materialize. There are multiple factors that affect that. There are bylaws, so there are permissions to be taken. Mumbai, for example, has multiple permissions that need to be taken to start any building, and then there are permissions that are required even while a building is in progress. So it takes a long time to get these permissions in place to actually start the building on site, and then when the building starts on site, it will take another 2 or 3 years for it to finish. So if you think that you're going to work 1 year in an architect's office or 2 years in an architect's office, you may not even see one single building start. So you need to be there for a period of at least 5 to 10 years, so to be able to experience that what you've designed on paper, how did it translate in reality? What were the functional aspects and how they were taken care of? What were the challenges and how they were overcome? All of these factors need to be understood to be able to be better informed when you start your own practice. And this is not just for 1 or 2 buildings. You need to be able to go through this ideally through every typology. An office building, how did it happen? What happened eventually? A residential building, a house, a school, a museum. So there are so many typologies of buildings. So if you think that 1 year, 2 years, 3 years is enough experience, it is not enough experience. You need to be there 5 to 10 years to gain sufficient experience to be able to start your own practice. It's the same thing with interior design. In interior design as well, you may get to do a house one day, it may start 3 months later, it may take 1.5 years to complete, it may take 9 months to complete. But you have to go through that entire process. And a house is just one. You want to be able to see larger projects like big office spaces being created in 3 or 4 months with breakneck speed, contractors working around the clock. So again, different typologies of interiors need to be experienced, need to be actually physically seen coming up on site. Again, what are the challenges that one faces in terms of the understanding of the workers? What are the different materials? How sometimes it's very difficult to procure a material. In tier 2, tier 3 cities, a lot of the materials that you get in the tier 1 cities is not available, so you have to wait before you get that. I mean, simple things like a ribbed glass. We were working in a smaller city and it was not available and it had to be shipped from Bombay. So, and then half the glass is broke, and then again it had to be shipped second time. So there are a lot of these aspects, the functional aspects of it, one needs to understand, and therefore one needs to work for a decent amount of time, which means at least 5 years in an office before you can go out and start your own practice. So to summarize, college education on its own is not enough, but when it is coupled with real experience simultaneously, it makes a huge amount of difference in understanding. And post that, one needs to experience different kinds of buildings in different spaces and how they have responded to the context, to the climate, and what they've achieved in terms of perception of space. And it's really important to gain practical knowledge by actually going through a project from the initial stages of design to its final execution and the final completion.